From the prophet Isaiah. Listen to me, you that pursue righteousness, you that seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you, for he was but one when I called him, but I blessed him and made him many. For the Lord will comfort Zion. God will comfort all her waste places, and will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Listen to me, my people, and give heed to me, my nation. For a teaching will go out from me, and my justice for a light to the peoples. I will bring near my deliverance swiftly. My salvation has gone out, and my arms will rule the peoples. The coastlands wait for me, and for my arm they hope. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath. For the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment, and those who live on it will die like gnats. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended. This is the word of the Lord.
Before I read the text from Matthew this morning, I'd like to ask you to do a little exercise with me. You may have found in your bulletin a card that says, "Who do you say I am?" Would you take that out and maybe find a pen or pencil? And while you're doing that, just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. There's nothing to be worried about in this. I'd like for us to take just a minute, and I'll keep the time, just a minute, minute and a half, and write down for ourselves and nobody else, who do I say Jesus is? Who do you say Jesus is? Now, you're not going to be great on this. We're not going to pass them in and take them up. And nobody else will ever have to see it. This may even just be the beginnings of an answer, an initial instinct, because this is just a quick thing here in worship. But you might keep it going this week, or keep it with you, or tuck it away in your Bible at home. So, no theological police, no judgment, no guilt, just a minute and a half. Write to yourself, who do I say Jesus is? We did that at the beginning of the sermon rather than at the end of the sermon, because I don't want this to be anything that is influenced by what I'm about to say. Maybe what I'm going to say will influence it, but this is a conversation between you and God that you can keep having, and that is started now. This morning, I'm continuing a series of messages called The Way of Jesus. We're following Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew through some key teachings and experiences. And this morning is the way of confession. The way of confession is when we say who Jesus is in response to a question, an implicit question that is asked to us by the world around us. Of who is this person and what do you believe? And the way of confession is to be able to say authentically, I believe Jesus is. And then to finish the sentence. So in this morning's gospel lesson, this section ends, a major section of Matthew, where Jesus has fed 5,000, and then he has walked out on the water to meet the disciples, and he's taught a great many confusing parables, and now he turns to his disciples to ask them the crucial question. Hear now the word. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Well, some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter." We might call it Rocky. "And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered his disciples not to tell anyone about the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We live in a very complex and diverse religious environment. You might even call our religious environment a thick religious stew. And one of the features of our stew is how quickly the ingredients are changing. One example that I'm sure you have heard or read about is the rise of the nuns. Not the nuns in habits, but the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Every poll for decades has shown that traditional religious affiliations like Presbyterian or Methodist or Episcopalian or Baptist are declining year by year. You've heard about this, right? We're increasingly aware in our communities of other religions and alternative religious practices. According to recent polling, the second largest religious group today in the United States, Canada, and Europe is none. 24% of Americans respond and say none. When a pollster asks them, "What is your religious affiliation?" they say none. And that doesn't mean they don't come to religious services. In fact, some of you in here might very well say none if someone were to ask you the question. Because nuns do come to religious services, and nuns do engage in spiritual practices. But what they say is, "I don't put myself in any particular religious camp. So if you ask me my affiliation, I'm going to say none." Now that's one aspect of our rapidly changing, thick and diverse religious environment. And it is not altogether unlike the religious environment we encounter with Jesus in Caesarea Philippi in our text. Last week, Jesus was north of Israel in the region of Tyre and Sidon. We said that was a foreign land, a pagan land. Now he's in Caesarea Philippi, which is a border city of that region. And Caesarea Philippi was its own thick, diverse religious stew. In Caesarea Philippi, there was a spring that fed the Jordan River. It's actually still there. And there's a cave that leads to the spring. And inside the cave is a shrine. And over the millennia, that shrine has been dedicated to different gods depending on who was living in the area. Most likely, at some point, it was dedicated to Baal Gad. At another point, perhaps to Baal Hermon. Those are two gods listed in the Old Testament. When the Greeks arrived, they dedicated the shrine to the god Pan, who's the god of shepherds and flocks. So there's this shrine there at the spring inside a cave. And by the way, if you want to know more about this, Jeremy has been there and has the picture to prove it. So he can tell you much more than I can. And some of you have probably been there too. The ancient folks believed that a shrine like that and a spring was a gate to the underworld. It was a gate to Hades or a gate to hell. So they would toss sacrifices down into the spring. Sometimes they'd toss people down into the spring as a sacrifice to the god of the underworld. So when Jesus says that the gates of Hades will not prevail against my church, he's talking about that kind of religious shrine and gate. So that's part of what's there in Caesarea Philippi. Now that cave is a cave in a rock wall, and the rock wall itself has a lot of religious symbolism. There are niches carved in the wall, and at the time that Jesus would have been there with his disciples, there would have been statues of different deities in the niches of the wall, because Rome practiced a kind of big tent religion. So you could worship all sorts of gods at the same time, as long as none of your gods conflicted with worship of Caesar. And Caesar had his own temple there in Caesarea Philippi. So as long as you could go and worship Caesar, they were fine with any other gods you wanted to worship. So all these gods are there depicted in statues in the rock wall and a shrine in the cave to the god Pan. And this is the thick religious context in which Jesus asks his disciples, who are people saying that the human one is? That is, Jesus. Who are people saying that I am? Sort of his own public opinion polling. And the disciples gave some answers. Well, some people say you're Jeremiah. Some people say you're Elijah. Some people say you're another one of the prophets, maybe a great preacher, John the Baptist. So here we have a city that is on the borderland with the rest of the world, and a rock wall and a cave that symbolizes a variety of God options, of religious options that are open to the people of that city. It's a thick and diverse religious soup. And I would say to you that that thick and diverse religious soup is not altogether different than the thick and diverse religious soup that we have, with the variety of God options that we have before us. Now, I mentioned the rise of the nuns. Let me give another wrinkle to this religious complexity. In a recent book called The Altars Where We Worship, a group of 3 religion professors begin with this claim: religion is important to Americans, but the religion we practice is not often the religion we confess. So they claim that all of us are religious, even the people who answer none on the religious affiliation question. And they cite as support for this Martin Luther. Martin Luther was asked, what does it mean to have a God? His response was, trust and faith of the heart alone make a god or an idol. Whatever then thy heart clings to and relies upon, that is properly thy God. Whatever your heart clings to and relies upon, whatever you trust in to give ultimate meaning and fulfillment to your life, that is your God. And therefore all of us have a God, because all of us are relying on something to give shape to our lives. The authors of The Altars Where We Worship contend that in the American landscape, quote, the objects of our attention have become our God, and fulfilling our desires has become our religion. So they expand on this thesis by doing a religious analysis of several features of popular culture that they contend form a popular religion, because these features each have their own myth, their own doctrines, their own ethics, their own institutions, their own rituals, and their own experiences. And what they're saying to us is that whether we claim to be Presbyterian or Baptist or Episcopalian or Methodist or Catholic or Buddhist or Hindu or none, those of us who swim in this thick American religious soup are actually worshiping at a variety of altars. Here are the altars that they list. They say that we worship at the altar of body and sex, where we seek to address our human cravings, understand the meaning of our sexuality. And they take the church to task for never talking about this, so that people have to understand their bodies elsewhere and not in church. They say we worship at the altar of big business, with a rags to riches narrative that fuels our imagination of what it means to be an American consumer and business person, and the ideal that conspicuous consumerism will heal all that ails the world. They say that we worship at the altar of entertainment, where we find diversions from reality and amusement that offers us control over lives that feel out of control and instant gratification. They say that we worship at the altar of politics, and whether you were on the left or the right, that what we look to give our lives meaning, to call us out of ourselves to a higher purpose, is the nation and the flag and the pledge. They say that we worship at the altar of sports, where the game takes on mythic proportions and we experience moments of ecstasy and revelation and inspiration. If you can call to mind a commercial for the Masters, or for March Madness, or for the Super Bowl, you will know exactly what they're aiming at. They are aiming at the religious experience of Augusta National, or the gridiron, or the court. We worship at the altar, they say, of science and technology, where we believe that through knowledge and experimentation we can unlock the secrets of the universe. We can gain control of the natural world. We can bring an end to disease. We can improve the quality of life for every person. All of these are altars with their own myths and their own doctrines, their own rituals, their own ethics, their own institutions, their own material symbols. We live in a complex and diverse and pluralistic religious environment. And sometimes these various gods come together and make common cause. The God of science and technology and the God of politics and the God of big business form an occasional trinity that we know as Big Pharma. Or the gods of sports and entertainment and big business form a different kind of trinity. It was on TV last night if you got a chance to watch it. Let me give you another example of this trinity of sports, entertainment, and big business. About this time of year, every year, I really start to look forward to the football season. And the teams that I cheer for are perpetually bad. They lose every year. So the Virginia Cavaliers and the Washington Redskins. And if you know either of those teams, you know it's a hard life. Every year, I start with hope and enthusiasm that maybe this year they're going to win. But I've been learning, and maybe you have, about the complicated and unholy trinity of big business and college sports and entertainment. About the damage that these men do to their brains at a young age that follows with them the rest of their lives, just so I can cheer for a pigskin to get over a goal line. Worship at the altar of football. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to go to the altar of football this season. But worship is not going to be as easy this year as it has been in the past, because now I know. We live in a thick religious soup, and there are many altars where we worship, all of us. Much like Caesarea Philippi, we live in this borderland where there are gods in the niches and gods in the caves, and there are shrines around us, and people can worship a whole variety of gods as long as you don't hurt anybody. We live in a religious borderland where most people, including us, hold a variety of beliefs together, some of which are complementary and some of which are contradictory. And I think if I'm honest, I think maybe the most honest people are the ones who say none. The ones who say, I worship at a variety of altars, so I can't put myself in any one camp. So this question that Jesus asks in the middle of a thick religious environment is relevant to us too. Who do people say that I am? But then Jesus goes one step farther and makes it personal. He does not leave it at the academic level. Jesus moves the conversation to say, who do you say that I am? And he asks his disciples to do what I asked you to do at the beginning of this message, just to give an instinctive response. Who do I say Jesus is? For any of us who seek to follow the way of Christ, this is the decisive question. For all of us who are disciples of Christ or who want to be disciples of Christ, this is the decisive question. Who do I say that Jesus is? And I believe that we each need to be able to give an answer to that that's authentic in the midst of this complicated religious soup. We need to be able to say that in some way that is true to us, to our closest friends, to our children, even simply to ourselves. Not long ago, a person told me an incredible story that is either an amazing story or an untrue story. I think it is true because I know the person who told me. He said that when he was 50, a pastor gave a sermon that made an impression on him and made him realize something. He realized that his faith had been important to him all of his adult life, but he had never shared that with anybody besides his immediate family. Nobody else in his life knew that his faith was important to him and that Jesus was important to him. And he said as he was looking into his 50s, he knew that he had some friends who had died in their 50s, and he said, I'm getting up there, and this is something I feel like I need to do. So his wife asked him, what do you want for your birthday? He said, I want to give a concert for 250 of my best friends. And we'll make it a benefit concert. And at intermission, I want to stand up and just say a few words. So 250 of his friends gathered, and they raised a lot of money. And at intermission, he stood up and said, I just want to tell you how important my faith is in my life and what Jesus means to me. And he didn't do it in a weird way, and I promise you he didn't recite the Apostles' Creed. He just said very simply to him who Jesus is. Jesus asks us that question in our borderland territory. He asks us that question when we're logging into our bank account or planning our finances. Who do you say that I am? He asks us the question when we're enrolling our kids in sports and we're filling up our calendar beyond belief. Who do you say that I am? He asks us that question when we're sitting back to watch a football season, kids inflicting lasting brain damage on each other to the cheers of the crowd. Who do you say that I am? When we go to youth, or when we choose a political candidate, or we support political issues, he asks us that question, who do you say that I am? And when we come to the boundary between life and death, and the doctors say there's nothing more we can do, he asks us that question, who do you say that I am? Peter confessed to Jesus, you are the Son of the living God. Over and over in the Scriptures we read that the God we worship, Yahweh, and made known in Jesus, is the God of the living, the God who is alive. Peter, standing there in front of that rock wall with all those niches and statues and that shrine, he said, Jesus, you are the Son of the God who is alive. All these other gods are dead, but you are the Son of the God who is real, the God who I can trust. Who do you say Jesus is? The truth is, all of us will worship some God, or one God, or many gods. That's not a question. The real question is whether the God you worship is worthy of your life. Amen.